The wind never really stopped out on the prairie. It howled in winter and whispered in spring, slid sharp beneath your collar in the fall, and rattled the grasses like bones in summer. Out there, where the land stretched without kindness, sky and earth touched each other without ever holding on. Caleb Morgan rode that wind like a man out of time. His horse, a flea-bitten gray with a hollow ribcage and eyes like burnt coal, picked its way through the tall grass with the caution of an old soldier. The saddle creaked, and the cold crept through the wool of Caleb's coat, but he kept going. He'd left the last settlement behind 3 days ago, heading west into a country stitched together with silence and snow. He wasn't searching for gold or God or anything you could hold in your hands. He was just trying to leave behind a war he hadn't chosen and a home that hadn't waited for him. The letter he carried in his breast pocket, creased and soft with rereading, was unsigned. Just a single sentence written in a woman's hand. She never made it to Oglala. They say she disappeared somewhere near Devil's Teeth Ridge. That ridge now loomed to the north, jagged and pale beneath a shroud of distant snowfall. Caleb made camp in a hollow between 2 hills where the wind dropped low enough to build a fire. He boiled coffee and warmed hardtack, chewing in silence, listening to the prairie breathe around him. Coyotes howled somewhere far off. The stars shone like ice chips. He did not sleep easy that night. By dawn, the frost had silvered everything. The world was sharp and thin and utterly still. Caleb saddled his horse again and rode northward toward the ridge. As he passed a stand of dead cottonwoods, something strange caught his eye, a mound in the snow, low and misshapen, not quite natural. He dismounted slowly. His boots crunched in the brittle crust as he approached. The snow there was packed but not old. He knelt, brushed at it, his fingers hit cloth. At first he thought it was a body, a shallow grave, a prairie execution. He'd seen it before, bandits or worse, leaving their dead to the wind and wolves. But then the cloth twitched. Not much, just a flutter, like a breath fighting its way back. Caleb dug fast, casting snow aside with bare hands. The frost bit deep, turning his skin red then white. A boot emerged, a skirt, a hand small and stiff and blue at the fingertips. He dug faster. When he uncovered her face, she wasn't breathing. Her lips were purple, her lashes crusted with ice. But she was warm beneath the ice, barely, faintly warm. He peeled off his coat and wrapped her in it without thinking. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on now, don't go giving up." Her hair was a dark tangle, damp with snowmelt. She was young, maybe 20, maybe younger. Dirt streaked her cheeks, and there was blood dried at the corner of her mouth. But her chest rose, just barely, like the prairie wind had borrowed her breath. He lifted her, light as nothing, and carried her back to the fire he rekindled with shaking hands. His coat steamed as the snow melted off her body. She didn't stir. He sat there through the morning, watching her breathe in fits and shudders, holding a cup of coffee he didn't drink. His fingers throbbed with cold. His mind worked back through the letter, through the stories he'd half believed. She'd been buried, left for dead or thought to be, and he had dug her out. There was a long silence between them as the sun rose higher, and the prairie blinked under its pale light. She didn't open her eyes, not yet, but he didn't leave. She stirred near dusk. Not like a waking woman, but like someone surfacing from far down, uncertain of her own limbs. Her breath caught in her throat, then rattled out. Caleb leaned closer, his hands open in his lap, fingers raw from the cold. He didn't speak right away. She needed space to find her way back. Her eyes opened slow, brown or maybe green, it was hard to tell in the firelight. She blinked once, twice, then tried to sit up. The weight of his coat held her down. "Easy," Caleb said, low and calm. "You're all right now, you were in the snow." She looked at him then, really looked. Her gaze was wary but not afraid. She didn't speak. Her lips were cracked, bloodless. He offered the tin cup, water. She took it with a trembling hand, sipping like a creature unused to kindness. After a moment, her voice rasped out, dry as old paper. "Where am I?" "Somewhere east of Devil's Teeth, close to a place no one ought to be in winter." She coughed, a wet sound, painful. "They left me, thought I was dead." "I figured as much." She looked away, eyes sinking into the fire. Her fingers clutched the coat closer to her chest. Caleb didn't ask her name. Not yet. She was like a wild thing just barely trusting not to be hunted. That night she didn't sleep. He could tell. She stared into the flames, her body rigid beneath the heavy wool. Caleb let her be. He kept watch, rolling cigarettes he didn't smoke, his breath making ghosts in the air. In the morning, her voice came clearer. They were headed to Oglala, said we'd make it before the storm hit. How many? 6, 2 wagons, only 1 horse left when they buried me. The silence that followed was raw and long. They didn't check close, she added. Caleb only nodded. He'd seen it before. Fever, starvation, despair, folks giving up too early or wanting to be rid of a burden. She pulled the coat tighter. You got a name. Caleb Morgan. I'm Elsie Rae Hawthorne. He said it once in his head to remember how it sounded. They stayed in that hollow 2 more days. He rationed food between them, melted snow for water, hunted a scrawny hare. She grew steadier with time, color returning to her face, hands less prone to shaking. She wore his coat like armor, the sleeves too long, the hem dragging in the dirt. On the 3rd morning, she stood without help. I need to go back, she said. If they're alive, they're in trouble. You sure? She nodded, jaw tight. I ain't scared of them, I'm scared of what they'll do next. Caleb saddled the horse. You ride. Well enough. They rode north together, her behind him on the gray. The land changed with each mile, growing starker, more wind-bitten. The sky hung low and gray as tin. They found the first wagon near a dry creek. Half-collapsed, snow-drifted, broken axle, blood on the canvas, no bodies. Elsie said nothing, but her hands clenched at his waist. Further on they found the second wagon, burned, still smoking, tracks all around it, boot prints, hooves, something dragged. Caleb dismounted. Stay here, he said. She didn't listen. They found a man nearby, throat cut. Another, curled behind a rock, pistol frozen in his hand. Both had been dead at least a day. Snow had begun to cover them, like the prairie trying to forget. Elsie knelt beside the first, brushing hair from his face. Clem, she whispered. He was kind, had a wife back east. Caleb said nothing. The wind did enough talking. She stood slowly, staring toward the west. I think one of them did this, not bandits, one of ours. Caleb watched her, the steel beginning to settle behind her eyes. You sure you want to follow that trail? I'm sure. They buried the bodies with what tools they had, piling rocks to keep the wolves off. Caleb wrapped Clem's hands in cloth before covering his face. Elsie stood with her head bowed, lips moving in silence. That night they camped on a rise above the burned wreckage. Caleb didn't sleep much, nor did she. In the firelight, she finally spoke again. They thought I wouldn't make it. Maybe I wouldn't have, but they didn't even try. He met her gaze across the flames. You did make it. And she nodded once, as if just now starting to believe it herself. They followed the tracks west, across land so flat it seemed the world had been scraped clean. Snow softened everything except the truth, hoofprints pressed into the crust, a broken strap from a saddle, blood dripped in a wavering line like a trail of spilled ink. Someone was riding hurt or riding hard. They moved in silence. Caleb gave Elsie the reins once just to see how she'd handle them. She rode steady, eyes never straying far from the horizon. The coat still hung off her like borrowed time, but her back was straight now, her voice sharper when she did speak. At a stream choked with ice, they found another sign. A scarf snagged on a branch, purple and woolen. Elsie's hand shook when she touched it. Marjorie, she said, we were bunking together. She was soft, not the kind to run. Caleb took the scarf, stuffed it in his saddlebag. Could be she didn't. That night the cold set in deeper. The fire cracked like old bones. Elsie slept curled near it, face turned away. Caleb sat watch, rifle across his lap, the stars wheeling slow and sure above. Come morning they crossed into broken country. The land rose and fell in low humps, dotted with juniper and scrub. A raven followed them for an hour, black against the blue-white sky. Caleb kept one eye on it. Signs meant something out here. By noon they found the cave. Not deep, just a pocket in the stone, but there been a fire there not long past. Blackened wood, ash still loose underfoot, and something else. Caleb spotted the bundle first. Wrapped tight in a feed sack, tucked into the back of the cave like someone wanted to forget it was there. He unwrapped it slow. A woman's dress, torn at the waist, blood at the collar. Elsie stood over him, face blank. Then she turned away, walked out into the snow. He let her go. Some grief needed room. When she returned, her voice was level. We keep going. Even if what's ahead. I ain't afraid of seeing it. So they rode. The next signs came quicker, tracks veering south, deeper now, more desperate. At dusk, they found a dying fire beneath a lone cottonwood, no one in sight but a kettle still warm. Caleb dropped low, studying the ground. One man, he said, sick or wounded, riding double. Elsie knelt beside him. Marjorie. Could be. She looked toward the darkening horizon. We'll ride through the night. The moon rose fat and gold, turning the snow into a sea of dull light. Their horse labored, breath steaming like a forge. Elsie didn't complain, didn't shift or sleep, just held on. Near dawn, they heard the gunshot. One sharp crack echoing off the low hills, then silence. Caleb spurred the horse. They found the camp not 2 miles ahead, two figures near a fire, one sprawled, the other crouched beside them. The one crouched rose when they approached, hands half raised, pale in the moonlight. It was a boy, maybe 16, gaunt, wild-eyed, a pistol in his hand. Don't come closer, he croaked. Elsie slipped off the horse before Caleb could stop her. Tobias. The boy flinched like she'd slapped him. You were dead. Not quite, she said. He lowered the pistol, staggering back. I thought they'd buried you. They did. She stepped toward him. Caleb watched her carefully, rifle still ready. The body near the fire stirred. A woman, eyes fluttering open, face hollow but alive. Marjorie, Elsie breathed. The boy fell to his knees, head in his hands. We didn't know what to do, he sobbed. After they turned on each other. After Boone, he went crazy, started talking about devils in the wind, said we had to leave you. Elsie knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You stayed alive, that counts for something. Marjorie reached weakly toward the fire. Caleb handed her a blanket. She clutched it like salvation. As light crept over the ridge, the prairie held its breath. 4 alive, where there'd nearly been none. Caleb looked at Elsie across the fire. She was no longer wrapped in his coat. She had given it to Marjorie. Her eyes were rimmed red, but steady. We'll need to head back east, she said. Tell the others, bury the rest proper. Caleb nodded, but neither of them moved. The snow kept falling, soft as forgiveness. The road east was longer than the one that had brought them there, though they followed much the same trail. Snow had begun to melt in patches where the sun lingered long enough to reach the ground. The prairie's breath thawed into mud and puddles, and the air held the faint scent of wet earth, like something long buried had begun to stir. They rode in quiet. Caleb led the way, the boy Tobias riding behind him, sullen and tired. Elsie took the reins of a second horse. Marjorie slumped in the saddle before her, wrapped tight in Caleb's coat and whatever blankets they could spare. Marjorie rarely spoke. Her voice came brittle, like leaves in a wind, and her eyes tracked movement with a fear that never left her. At night, she curled close to Elsie like a child and flinched at every crack of firewood. Caleb watched her but said nothing. He'd seen wounds like that before, quiet ones, cut into the soul instead of the skin. They bled slower but longer. On the 4th day, a storm blew in from the west. Bitter rain instead of snow, enough to soak through clothes and skin. They found a way station, half collapsed but dry, and made camp inside. Elsie built the fire while Caleb unpacked the horses. Tobias sat with his arms wrapped around his knees, face streaked with dirt. Marjorie hovered near the warmth like a shadow. That night, as rain hammered the roof, Elsie spoke to Caleb for the first time in hours. They'll never believe it, she said, watching the flames. What happened out there? Doesn't matter if they believe, matters that we know. She looked over at Tobias. The boy had fallen asleep sitting up, head against the wall. He was the youngest, she said, always listening. That's how he survived, kept his mouth shut. And you? I did what I had to. I remember the way Boone looked at me before they laid me in the snow, like I was already gone. He needed someone to leave behind, and I was quiet enough to forget. She touched the scar just beneath her jawline. It had turned a sickly pink. Caleb had cleaned it best he could, but the cold had bitten deep. "I'm not quiet now," she said, almost to herself. "No," he agreed, "you're not." In the morning, the rain had passed. The sky broke wide with sunlight, and the air smelled cleaner than it had in days. They rode on, passing through gullies filled with runoff, their clothes damp but spirits steadier. It was Caleb who spotted the vultures circling. He veered toward them without a word. The others followed. They found what remained of Boone and the last man, nothing but bones and torn leather. Rifles broken. No horses. The snow had covered them before the animals could strip them entirely. Tobias stood over the bodies with his jaw clenched. "He started it," he said, "all of it." Elsie didn't answer. She stepped forward, picked up a crushed tin pendant from the ground, and turned it in her fingers. Then she dropped it into the fire Caleb lit for burial. Ash curled into the wind. That evening they found the old settlement, barely more than a store, a church, and 3 homes nailed together by stubborn hands. Smoke drifted from one chimney. A hound barked once and fell silent. An old woman came out to greet them. Weather-worn, with eyes like glass buttons, she looked over the group, noting the state of them. "Hard trail?" she asked. Elsie nodded, long. They were given bread and coffee, the kind of welcome only found in places where folks know hunger firsthand. Caleb traded for supplies. Tobias slept in a barn loft and didn't come down until morning. Before they left, the old woman pulled Caleb aside. "You keep watchin' her," she said, nodding toward Elsie. "She walks like she's got steel in her belly, but her soul's still patchin' holes." "I know," Caleb said. "You love her." He didn't answer, but his eyes followed Elsie across the yard as she helped Marjorie onto the horse, one hand gentle on her back. They rode out into the gray light, the prairie behind them quieter now, as if it, too, was trying to forget the weight of what had passed. But Caleb didn't forget. And Elsie, wrapped once more in silence, rode a little taller than before. Spring arrived in fits and false starts. The earth cracked open slow, not trusting warmth, and the rivers ran high with meltwater. Grass began to push up through the thaw, timid but insistent. The world was waking but cautious. They reached Oglala after another week's ride, a township strung along a shallow river, with a sawmill on one end and a chapel on the other. Smoke curled from the chimneys of homes stitched together from plank and patience. Wagons creaked down muddy lanes. Dogs barked at chickens and nothing in particular. Caleb had passed through once before, years back, on his way to somewhere he no longer remembered. It felt different now, not gentler but settled. They found a room above the general store. 2 beds, thin walls, the smell of dried tobacco in the floorboards. Marjorie took to the corner nearest the stove and rarely left it. Tobias found work in the stables, sweeping stalls and learning the rhythm of animals that didn't talk back. Elsie wandered. She walked the edge of the river at dusk, boots sinking in soft banks, fingers grazing the tall reeds. She returned with her hair damp, her expression distant. When she spoke, it was brief, practical. But some evenings, when the wind calmed and the world held still, she would sit beside Caleb on the back steps, her shoulder barely brushing his. "You ever think about leaving it all behind?" she asked once. "All the time." And he looked out over the prairie. "It always follows. What matters is who walks beside you when it does." She was quiet a long while. Then she said, "I think I'd like to try staying, just for a while." So they stayed. They didn't speak of what had passed, not to the townsfolk, not to each other. Caleb took work hauling lumber from the mill. His hands found purpose in the weight of things. He liked the ache in his shoulders at the end of the day, the sweat, the silence. Elsie took up sewing in the afternoons, helped an old widow with mending. Her fingers, once stiff with frostbite, moved with care and precision. One morning, she came home with a bag of flour and a stubborn little dog following her. "He was at the edge of town," she said. "Wouldn't stop nipping my boots." Caleb raised a brow. "You keeping him?" "He keeps me," she said, and that was that. The dog took to sleeping beneath her bed and occasionally by the door as if watching for something or someone. Life folded around them, small and slow. Marjorie began to eat more, though she still wouldn't go into the chapel. Tobias stopped flinching when men raised their voices. Caleb and Elsie shared meals, shared quiet, shared glances that lingered longer than before. And then one night, the past arrived. It came with a rider. A man with a beard like tangled wire and eyes like chipped stone. He came through Oglala slow, on a bay horse too lean for the distance. Caleb saw him first from the millyard, and something in the man's posture, tight-shouldered, mean-leaning, made him drop the beam he carried. The man rode straight to the general store, tied his horse, and stepped inside. Elsie was upstairs. Caleb moved faster than he had in weeks. He found her by the stove, untying her boots. "Don't take em off," he said. She looked up, saw the tightness in his jaw. "Who is it?" "Don't know, but he's not here to buy flour." She rose, already moving. The dog barked once, a warning. Caleb fetched the rifle from behind the door. They met the man on the landing. He didn't smile when he saw Elsie, but something in his face curled like a sneer. "Well now," he said, "ain't you the ghost?" She didn't flinch. "You were with Boone." "Damn right, and you were supposed to be dead." Caleb stepped between them. "You got business here." "Just passing through. Heard there was a woman in town who didn't stay buried." "You heard wrong," Elsie said. "That woman's gone." The man looked from her to Caleb. "You protecting her." Caleb said nothing, but the rifle stayed raised. The man spat, should have stayed in the ground. Then he turned, walked down the stairs, mounted his horse, and rode out of town like a storm turning back to sea. Elsie stood still for a long time after. "You all right?" Caleb asked. "I will be," she said. "I keep digging myself out, don't I?" He didn't touch her, not yet, but he stayed beside her until the shadows stretched long across the floor and the stove burned low. Outside, the prairie swayed, restless, watching. Summer crept in without fanfare. The prairie bloomed in hush, wildflowers opening like quiet hymns, wheatgrass swaying beneath a sun that had forgotten how to be cruel. Cicadas sang in the heat, and the river shrank to a ribbon of silver, winding slow through the lowlands. Caleb built a fence that month. Not for cattle, he had none, but for the sake of seeing something held together. His hands knew the shape of labor, of hammer and grain, of things that could be built slow and kept from blowing away. Elsie helped, dragging posts into line, measuring distance with knotted twine and patience. She smiled more often now, but not wide, just enough to show she still knew how. In the evenings, they sat on the stoop with coffee warm between their hands, the little dog stretched long at their feet. The past didn't speak loud anymore. It drifted at the edges, shaped by memory, but no longer calling the tune. Marjorie had taken up work in the chapel kitchen, kneading bread with sleeves rolled high, her laughter still rare but no longer impossible. Tobias had found a girl with a stubborn jaw and a fast horse, and now spent more time smelling like hay and soap than grief. They were beginning again, all of them, in the way only those who'd been undone could manage, with care and slowness, like lighting a lamp in wind. One night, under a moon that hung low and gold, Elsie stood in the doorway while Caleb washed the dust from his hands in a tin basin. She didn't speak, just watched him. "I've been thinking," she said finally. He looked up, water dripping from his knuckles. "About that morning," she said, "when you found me." He dried his hands on a rag. "What about it?" "I remember the way your coat smelled, like smoke and pine and cold. I remember thinking it felt too warm for a dead man's arms." Caleb folded the rag. "You weren't dead." "I was close." "You weren't gone." She stepped closer, voice soft. "I was buried." He met her eyes, "And I dug you out." There was silence, thick and full, the kind that held more truth than words could. Elsie reached out, brushed her fingers against his. Not quite a touch, more a tether. "You ever think," she said, "that maybe we were both buried out there, just different kinds of graves?" "I do now," he said. This time, when she took his hand, he held it. Not with urgency, not with sorrow, just with the steadiness of someone who knew what it meant to stay. The coat still hung by the door. She didn't wear it anymore, not because she didn't need warmth, but because she had found it elsewhere. Seasons would turn again. There would be wind and grief and fire. But there would also be bread baked in the chapel oven, children chasing dogs through sunlit grass, the slow stretch of fence lines, and the comfort of a voice that knew your name in darkness. Home, after all, wasn't a place. It was a choice made daily, a hand offered in silence, a coat laid over frozen shoulders, and someone willing to dig until the breath came back.